this year, but also we did hear feedback that folks are really they were a little unsure about what to do. So they kind of held on to some stuff in February and finally brought it to us in March. Happy to try to answer any questions if you have them. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Pond management.
So we have a bit of a presentation about pond management principles. This is something that Natural Resources has been working on for quite a while. We've had a couple of public forums, one last summer, one earlier this spring. And with the help of the Nantucket Pond Coalition, who engaged a consultant to look at a number of different pond management issues, he's reviewed these and provided some input on them, most specifically with regard to Myacomet Pond. And not to skip too much ahead to Myacomet Pond, but since it's controversial from time to time, the general management principle for that pond would be if I'm speaking on this right, you guys can correct me, when it reaches a certain defined level via an established measuring method, the pond would be opened. And in a way that would allow the pond water to come out and then a controlled opening and not let seawater come in. Is that correct? Sort of?
Yes, that is correct. Sorry, Jeff Carlson, the Natural Resources Director. So that assessment of Myacomet Pond and for what we're talking about is correct. That's something that isn't necessarily directly included at this point because we are actively trying to permit that strategy with the Corps of Engineers right now. In the study that we did with the Pond Coalition themselves. So that's kind of actively going on and being reviewed at the Army Corps of Engineers.
Thank you. Okay. I think you all might maybe remember Thais. She's our new water quality biologist.
Hi, thank you. I think I've pretty much met everyone. Oh, sure. Like she said, my name is Thais. I'm the water resource specialist. I'm not used to standing my back towards people, so forgive me if that's coming across as rude. But this was presented a little more in depth earlier on in April, so this is just a condensed version. But thank you for having me tonight to hopefully accept these Great Ponds management principles. So as you know, Nantucket is home to 7 of our great ponds, which include Hummock, Long, Sacajah, Myacomet, Cascada, Gibbs, and Tom Nevers. However, since the 1980s, the town has been managing 4 of these great ponds, which is Hummock, Long, Myacomet, and Sacajah. And so our Natural Resources Department is dedicated to monitoring and researching and restoring our healthy plant and animal communities through maintaining the water quality of our harbors and ponds. And so, as we all know, changes in our population and land use in Nantucket have altered our watershed inputs into the ponds, causing detrimental changes to our aquatic ecosystems. And over time, the water quality and our associated habitats have begun to degrade, and improved management is very crucial in restoring these important habitats. Okay. Nantucket is defined and dependent on its aquatic environment. Nutrients and pollutants from our land use development, including our wastewater, are conveyed through groundwater to our surrounding coastal systems, with concentrations and directional flows determined by our watersheds. And unfortunately, our ponds have been receiving an excessive amount of these nutrients through overland and subsurface flow, which has, as all of you I'm sure have seen at one point, led to overgrowth of algae and invasive plants, loss of our native species, and depletion of dissolved oxygen and decreased water clarity. And so rapid growth in these recent decades, and especially in the coastal zone off island, and obviously this island is a beautiful place to live, and you've seen all of the development. It has increased the demand for energy, food, and housing. And so with this consumption is the increased demand for obviously fertilizer use, increased output of sewage, and increased use of fresh water. So in addition, landscape changes, invasive species, alteration to hydrology, as well as climate changes have further altered coastal and our estuarine ecosystems. The Natural Resources Department created the pond management principles as a step towards finding solutions to achieve healthy ponds based on our extensive data and research. So our document was created to help solve and manage the previous issues discussed earlier that are affecting our ponds. And a draft, as was stated earlier, was presented last year. Unfortunately, I was not here to hear that, but we did receive public comment and suggestions for management, which was included in our principles, which we're presenting today, that we also did earlier in April and then received more feedback. And the overarching goals of the pond management principles document is to maintain our pond use through enhancing the public's ability to utilize the pond for recreation without having any adverse impacts to the ponds, as well as reduce human-made inputs to the ponds and implement the best available measures to improve our water quality. Improve and update pond and watershed data collected to include habitat evaluation, as well as to capture the ecosystem and environmental health. And lastly, to evaluate and implement cost-effective management options as we want to be making financially smart decisions for the town. So I want to just briefly go through each of the ponds just to give a status of them as well as the current and future management items that have been going on for each of our ponds. Hummock Pond is a coastal brackish pond. It's located on the southern shore of the island. And you can see by this little that's my pointer box here that the long-term nitrogen trend for Hummock Pond is actually increasing. And there is a high potential for our blue-green algae blooms. In 2017 and 2018, water quality declined through most of the estuary, including the lower basin. We do our biannual openings, and this is necessary predominantly to enhance our fish resources, as a lot of them use it to spawn and then released out into the ocean and come back to do the same. Also, it does facilitate the dilution of a high nutrient pond waters with our low nutrient oceans. The primary ecological threat to this pond is degradation due to nutrient enrichment. This figure on the right was taken from the Massachusetts Estuary Report from 2013. And according to this report, most of the overall nitrogen load to Hummock Pond is from wastewater at 65%. There's also dense submerged aquatic vegetation, cyano, harmful algal blooms, and the invasive wetland grass Phragmites. So that affects our public use, but also has negative impacts for the wildlife in and around the pond. Our water quality standards are also not being met due to high total phosphorus and high total nitrogen. Moving on to Sacajah Pond. This is a coastal brackish pond on the northeastern shore. It's naturally non-tidal, and so most of the freshwater input to Sacajah occurs via the groundwater seepage. Our salinity is maintained by the periodic breaching of the barrier by the town, and although looking at this box here, the long-term nitrogen trend is decreasing, there is still an elevated potential for blue-green algae. So with our limited openings from 2014 to 2017, our total nitrogen actually has risen and has returned to near our historic levels with an improvement in last year's numbers. So that was good for last year, but it's still something that we're working on. The primary ecological threat to Sacajah is degradation, again, to nutrient enrichment. We have high total nitrogen, total phosphorus, and iron content that is entering the pond system through small streams, and that does represent a distinct concern with regards to phosphorus availability. And according to the Sacajah Pond Massachusetts Estuaries Project report, which this pie chart was taken from, most of the locally uncontrollable nitrogen load to Sacajah is from direct precipitation of nitrogen on the water body surface. It's also closed to shellfishing due to historic bacterial concerns, as well as its water quality standards are not being met, again, due to total high phosphorus and total nitrogen. Now, Long Pond is our tidally restricted brackish pond that is surrounded by several closely settled residential lots with septic systems and private wells, and also, obviously, the town landfill is located on the eastern shore. The overall trend for nitrogen levels has been decreasing, and our potential for blue-green algae blooms is actually low. So that is great news for Long Pond and the efforts that have been done to do that. So although the long-term nitrogen trend has been decreasing for Long Pond, there are still some ecological threats that the pond does face, which includes invasive plant species, submerged aquatic vegetation, and fecal coliform and periodic algal blooms. So that does still go on in Long Pond. The water quality standards were met for 2015 all the way to last year of 2018, as the entire pond average for total nitrogen has been below our total maximum daily load for Long Pond. So that is also great news for one of our ponds. And lastly, we always save the best for last, Myacomet Pond. This pond receives most of its water inputs from direct surface water runoff, about like 653 acres, while the remaining 387 acres of the watershed contribute to groundwater input through isolated depressions. This pond does have the largest watershed, and because of this, it was last opened in permit in 2005 due to flooding concerns, and then it also was illegally opened last year for the same reason. The overall trend you can see here from Myacomet Pond has been increasing, and there is a high potential for blue-green algae blooms. The ecological threats to Myacomet include invasive species, fecal coliforms, and blue-green algae. This figure on the right was taken from the Applied Science Associates Myacomet Pond study, and this indicated that the predominant nitrogen load to Myacomet was due to wastewater at 44%. The water quality standards are not being met, as there is high total phosphorus and high total nitrogen that are over threshold values.
On that for a second, that's fairly high. Usually it seems to me wastewater has 44% is a high percentage.
Yeah.
Am I reading that right?
No, you are reading that correctly. I do have to note that this figure, actually, this pond study was taken in 2002. Okay. So it is a quite outdated report that was done.
And most of it is atmospheric usually. Or, yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, that is true.
Okay.
Mm. So after reviewing existing water quality data and our long-term trends and meeting with the community, we have determined to minimize the human-made impacts to the great ponds of Nantucket. So through minimizing these impacts, actively incorporating responsible management, and performing public education and outreach, these systems do have the potential to be restored back to their healthy ecosystems once again through long-term and short-term goals. And so the Natural Resources Department has investigated potential dredging removal of nutrient-laden sediments or chemical treatments such as phosphorus inactivation, which is a chemical binding of phosphorus to limit its availability into aquatic ecosystems. Some of the pond systems that require short-term goals regarding in-pond management include controlling internal nutrient loading through our biannual openings or combating pond weeds through our aquatic vegetation removal. But we want to emphasize that it's the long-term watershed management techniques that are considered optimal as they eliminate or reduce the larger issue here of excess nutrients coming into our ponds. And so a lot of this has helped with educating the public on their role in nutrient pollution, while minimizing costs associated with our immediate short-term management techniques. So for example, we can use best management practices such as selecting native landscaping, or taking into consideration using a licensed landscaper to make sure they're abiding by our fertilizer regulations, as we want to limit the quantity of nitrogen fertilizer applied per year and having no phosphorus containing fertilizer unless a soil test indicates that it is necessary. Some other suggestions that is useful is inspecting, obviously, our septic systems every 5 years, or using our IA systems, as well as supporting sewer extensions can help minimize a lot of these things. So our next steps for our island and the water resources, and we'd like to incorporate these eventually pond management into our 2020 island-wide water quality management plan. And so this plan is going to take a watershed-based approach to restore our embayment water quality, and will offer recommendations to reduce or eliminate excess nutrients and consider remediation and restoration approaches to include the management of our ponds. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just have one question about each of the pie charts. I think there was one that was 2002 and then the others were 2012.
Yes.
Is there a need to update that information, and how easy or difficult is that to do?
Yeah. So we do have our yearly reports on water quality that we contract out to SMES in New Bedford. And so they provide basic reports of our ponds each year. They're reports that were taken from those were older studies. Forgive me, as I'm not sure. I don't believe any were done recently regarding the intensity of that research project that was done. I can get back to you on the Applied Sciences Academy pond study. But there is, based on the reports that we do have, we can create, obviously, new updated data just based on the monthly sampling that we are doing since we had started. So,
And we'd be able to identify what the sources of the pollution are then?
specifically, we can look at the levels that are tested for, but it would be difficult to be, again, if there's high nitrogen content versus high phosphorus content, you can sort of decipher where something might be coming from sewage versus fertilizer. Mm-hmm. But it would be difficult to be like, this is exactly where it's coming from as it's based on.
So the year to year is sort of as accurate as this would have been in 2002?
Yes, I would say so.
In terms of identifying sources.
Mm-hmm.
Do you test for things besides phosphorus, nitrogen? You're testing for other pollutants?
For our testing that we do for the town, we don't do further chemical pollutants. Nitrogen and phosphorus is done for our streams and ponds. We do nutrient testing and of the basic parameters of water, such as salinity, pH levels, chlorophyll levels, et cetera. But
we're not looking for other pollutants either.
No, but okay. I mean, that's something that I know I'm personally interested in, and I think it's just the resources that we have at our hands. But hopefully in the future, we will have our water quality lab on island, which I'm hopeful for.
We discuss swimming pools and chlorine and that type of thing and what the impact is. And is that something that you guys are considering, or is that something you're looking at the impact? I know there are certain communities in Iowa and out in California that have found very serious impacts on some of the, because of some of the things, especially saltwater pools, which I thought, saltwater is great, but they found some very serious impacts. Is that something that you guys are looking into for here?
That could be something. I mean, as this is a new position for myself, and obviously we are a collaborative organization, but that is something that is obviously on my radar, and pools are an impact. So,
okay, yeah, I've been at this a long time, and one of the things that was told to me 20 years ago from people giving some of these things is, in a lot of these areas, we don't know exactly, but the real impact is the number of houses. It's the amount of, the amount of hardscaping. It's all the things that you're doing. And unless you're willing to tackle those things, unless you're willing to really enforce those things, some of this won't work. And they told us that 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I think that we have, so I hope when we do the, embayment approach, I hope we're looking at all the factors in the abatement. I hope we aren't,
of course.
trying to get rid of a few things, but then we're making it twice as worse on the other side.
Sure.
Sure. So I think the approach that we're looking at overall is really starting to look at more of that watershed level approach and looking at it as far as drinking water wells, public wellhead recharge, how we're dealing with septic and sewers, and kind of all collectively working together to say, let's look at the watershed and what's the best bang for our buck? What's the best tools that we can give to neighborhoods? Because I'll be the first to say that there are a lot of neighborhoods that have put in infrastructure to treat stormwater that haven't been given the tools to maintain those systems to do it. Is how do we get everyone up to speed and up and running throughout the watershed, not just one little pocket here or there or one set of rules or regulations that are applied to very specific situations, but the bigger picture.
Right, that would be great. And I think bringing up the, sort of we dig a hole, and if they don't, they dig a hole and the water goes into there. But if we don't ever change the filters, or you don't clear out if you don't clear out the grasses and clean that stuff out every so many years, you're actually making it worse because you've just put the pollutant closer to our groundwater. So, sometimes we require people that want to do things to put all these systems in, and they're never maintained. So I think it's, if we're going to actually sort of really look into it and enforce it, it's more than just, it's more than just public, it's more than just public knowledge. It's more than just education that needs to happen if we're going to be successful here. Education, I read and I argue about this all the time. She's smiling. Education is the fun stuff. It's the easy stuff my employees want to do. The grunt work is the hard stuff. And some of those things, no one wants to be the bad guy. That's the hard stuff. So I hope that we're going to do that.
So do I.
Yes.
Can I just ask, it's only because it's the talk of the town on the Cape and other places on the mainland, PFAS. Is that anything that we should be worried about here?
Do you want to take that one? I'm going to pass that one off.
Yeah, so we do have a PFAS meeting scheduled. We have one of our consultants coming in with their national expert, coming in to talk about PFAS to the cabinet, to sort of catch everybody up to speed. Various departments are already dealing with it. I know the airport is dealing with it, fire department. It's being talked about already with the water and sewer regulators and the landfill as well. So it's pretty timely.
So we'll find out more soon.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Sure. So I think to wrap up tonight, I know we provided the principles into the packet. I think we're hoping to kind of get some sign off on those, because that's something that we're going to try to incorporate a little bit more refined version into the water quality plan, but at least to know that we're headed in a good direction that everyone seems to be supportive of, because I think at the end of the day, when we come forward with the water quality plan from the strategic plan goal, we want to have a really refined product with actionable items that we can actually accomplish and do and take those watershed level steps, not just for the ponds, but that will also include the harbors. But this will give us some good guidance for the ponds themselves.
Can I just ask, and I know Libby mentioned it as regards my comment pond, do we have the detail on how it will be measured, when it will be opened? Do we have the detail yet, or is that something that we're still working on?
Sure. So that's something that we're still actively working on with our consultant. We've started that conversation and applied to the Corps for what they would be looking for and the parameters they would be looking for in those specific situations and how that permit would read. And to gain some flexibility in some of our other pond openings for time of year and kind of the restrictions that we have for primarily Sacajawea, but for Sacajawea in my comment. So that's kind of a work in progress. Again, that's something that really is more affected in the spring. So I think we're hoping to have all those details hammered out kind of through this fall and winter, and having that open discussion with the Corps of Engineers is something that we think is important to do.
Thank you.
Do we need a vote?
I think we'd like adoption of the principles, and we can come back to you with
Yes,
some of the
please.
specifics
Okay.
when we have them.
Is there a motion?
Make a motion to adopt the principles as represented.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you for the time.
Okay, next we have a paid parking system update. This is not associated with our normal strategic plan update. This would normally be part of that. But through a contact that the chief had with Barnstable, we were able to meet with the town of Barnstable's parking manager yesterday. And we wanted to, as a result of that, we really sort of focused on what our implementation plan is for paid parking. And I want to review with you just some of the detail. This sheet that I'm going to go over with you right now is very detailed. It is not for any decision making on your part. It's just so you gain a maybe deeper understanding, as we did, about what all needs to be done, we believe, in order to implement the system. And then I'm going to show you a summary of what our intended plan is. So this sheet just reviews the select board's focus area of transportation and references the goal number 1 under that focus area, which is as it reads there. And then there are a series of people identified as being associated with the implementation of the goal. There's a point of contact, project manager, there's an implementation team. We think there may be need for a program manager. Barnstable has a dedicated paid parking program manager, and we think that's going to be probably important to have a successful program. Administrative guidance and direction will be given through the town manager. Policy direction, of course, will be needed by the board at some point. There are staff assistants, dedicated people listed there, stakeholders we will need to be getting involved with shortly, and then just various other interested parties. So following that is simply a draft outline of the development of a paid parking plan, beginning with the preparation of a pro forma business plan. We're working to identify estimated costs and expenses that are associated with the resources, equipment, staffing that will be needed, along with potential estimated revenues. The 2011 Nelson Nygaard report does contain some valuable information about that, which we are going to be pulling from. We'll hopefully be able to explore some potential cost sharing from potential business partners, and there may be some potential grant opportunities. So we're going to be working on this so that we can determine what exactly would be needed from the general fund or other budgets in order to implement the program entirely. We're working on a timeline, which includes procurement, what we need for fiscal 20 and 21, and hiring of additional staff, which will probably need to occur in fiscal 20. Other items that we're going to need, these are not prioritized, they're just a listing, are listed there. I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but there are a number of things that we've identified. This is not necessarily an exhaustive list, but some of them include things like, and this is going to get into some policy issues with the board at a later time, what changes are needed or will we be proposing to the timed parking districts and perhaps the commercial parking districts? We may be needing to establish an enterprise fund for the parking revenue. That's the paid parking revenue, not the parking fines. They're different. Maybe there's a role for the data platform or another group like that. We'd have to procure it for data collection assistance. There may be a need for special legislation for increasing parking fines. Barnstable, for example, has higher fines than obviously the paid parking, so that you're more encouraged to use the paid parking and not get fined for parking too long. There may be some exemptions we want to look at in the existing parking regs. We'll need to look at organizational structure, potential adjustments. If we are going to have a successful paid parking program, we need a parking division. Where is it going to live? And I'm not asking you any of this. We're going to be coming up with recommendations on it, but I'm just telling you. Barnstable has an interdepartmental parking team, for example, that addresses issues that crop up. One of the takeaways we got from our discussion was there really needs to be proper communication between those that are on the ground doing not only the enforcement, but the administration of the paid parking, the people who help the public figure the paid parking out, and those who are making decisions. They identified in Barnstable a couple of disconnects that they've been working to fix, and so we want to learn from their experience. So that was really interesting. Signage and kiosk locations are going to be important, the kiosks being the pay stations. And then potential agreements with private parking lot owners. We have at least one major private parking lot that we have had some discussion with the property owners about having the town administer that lot, but we think that it's going to be important to reach some kind of agreement with them, hopefully. Barnstable, for example, has agreements with the Cape Cod Mall and the Cape Plaza across the street. That's just two examples. They manage the parking over there, and they take in the revenue. Those private groups handle things like overnight parking, but they have identified what the town is going to do and what the private groups are going to do. So that was actually pretty interesting. We had some initial ideas for transition and incentives. Parking credits. Barnstable, for example, gives credits to people who use certain parking lots. So if they want to park downtown, they would not necessarily outright pay. They'd be able to use their credits. Park downtown, say, if they're an employee and they park in a lot when they go to work, they could get some sort of credit. And then when they do want to go downtown to go out to dinner or whatever, they could potentially use their credits. We've talked about a direct commuter express shuttle, nonstop, to and from the downtown. We also talked about that earlier at a board meeting when we were talking about the valet this year. We think this might be an important component of the program so that people can easily get to and from downtown. That may be an arrangement with the NRTA. It may be something different. We need to explore that. Cultural shifts that need to be initiated. Barnstable had some good ideas about how to tackle that. And they've had a paid parking program for a while, but they overhauled it in 2017 and learned even more about what it takes to have a successful program. Let's see, one of them, I didn't totally identify it here, but for example, they have what they call gateway greeters that are actually housed in their visitor services department who roam certain areas where they have paid parking, and their sole job is to help people figure out the parking. They help them with an app. They help them with the pay station. If somebody, for example, wants to park at the High Line, they say to them, "Are you going to Nantucket?" And they say, "Yes." "Are you going to be there overnight?" "I don't know. I'm planning to come back in the afternoon, but I'm not sure." So the gateway greeter says, "You should really think about not parking here right now, because if you're here for longer than 6 hours, you are going to get a ticket, and it's going to be more expensive than what you'd pay to park here for 6 hours." They have a 12-hour limit. So they would be redirected to a paid lot, and they have shuttles to get there, and they can tell them all about how to get there. So it's things like that. And by the way, their whole program over there is called Park Happy. So they're trying to turn it into a happy experience. And they've got the gateway greeters that really help with that. So that we want to definitely take a look at something like that, which is another thing we talked about. Should we name or brand our program? That sometimes makes it more, palatable or engaging to people. Public outreach and education is obviously going to be important, and we're going to be developing a plan and a timeline that will get more fully evolved as we move into the procurement and other timeline processes. Outreach for alternative modes of transportation, shuttle, carpool, walk. In Barnstable, for example, they say you should, if it's not too far, walk. You can get your steps in, and everybody has that on their wrist and stuff like that. And Remain is already really helping get the word out about alternative modes of transportation. There are some challenges that Barnstable mentioned that we also probably have, as do many towns, and one of them is cellular or Wi-Fi coverage. That's not really part of this goal. That sort of related to another board goal, but they were saying that they do have gaps in coverage sometimes when there's hundreds of people, for example, down at the High Line. Sometimes the app goes down, or the pay station doesn't come up right away. And that's where the gateway greeters come in handy, because they can help facilitate that. Even if it's down, the information can still be put in, and then it will it will get downloaded when the system comes back up. So they say that they live with it. It's not something that is overly detrimental to their program, but they've learned to sort of work around it. We'll have to discuss at some point closure or not of the loopholes and workarounds that we have here, and that they mentioned some of theirs. So those are just things we'll bring to your attention at some point when it comes time to potentially redo regulations and maybe legislation. So that's just some of the detail that I wanted you to see. But next is more of a summary of what our multi-stage 3-year implementation plan would look like. Step 1 would be for next summer, 2020, we would implement, I won't read every little thing on here, but we'd implement paid parking in the core using pay stations and pay-by-plate technology tied into an app. Paid parking in parking lots. This is just suggested at the moment. This is a working document right here. We've talked about 37 Washington, Silver Street, and 2 Fairgrounds. That might not end up being our final recommendation, but that's what we're initially looking at. We would implement an e-permitting program. Barnstable told us a lot about theirs and a lot of the benefits that they have. So potentially no more residential sticker. It would all be done online and through and electronically. So, for example, if you are a resident downtown and you're eligible for a residential parking permit, you would no longer be issued a sticker, but there would be a license plate reader technology, so that if there's the parking control, people would go through the residential district, read the license plates, and it would come up as to whether or not they have a residential parking permit. As noted here, it would be a license plate reader-based enforcement program, and then the gateway greeters. In the following summer, we would expand the paid parking to the residential parking district, and potentially in what would become a new outer district, because obviously when we initially implement the paid parking, probably there's going to be some move out to areas where there isn't paid parking, although I think we're seeing that now a bit. I'm hearing that lots of people are parking in sort of the outer district where there is no timed parking at the moment. The creation of additional residential parking districts, these would be sort of like neighborhood-based sections. So for example, right now, if you have a residential parking permit, you can park anywhere in the residential area, not just near your house. So the idea would be that there would be a neighborhood. You can park there, but you can't park in the one that's way far away. You park only in yours. If you want to park in the other one, then you're going to be paying for it. We're talking about maybe there would be free parking lots with direct shuttle transportation. Ideally, the lots we sort of initially identified were the ones that are listed here. We need to talk to their owners, and we need to get it figured out if it can be figured out. But 2 of these lots are already park and rides. The intermediate school or elementary school lot in the rear there is used in the summer for camps and things, we realize, but it's unused for the most part. So we want to see if there's a way to utilize that. And then potentially adding some additional technology to facilitate island-wide enforcement and data collection, not just the downtown. The following summer, the 3rd summer, we potentially, this is a goal, this is a maybe, we don't know if it's achievable or not, but in the planning stage, anything is achievable. Implementing smart parking sensor technology so that you would know when spaces are opening up. You could go on an app and find out when somebody has just left a space. That is going to be challenging here in areas where we have cobblestones, for example. That I don't think it's going to work there, but it could work in the parking lots. So one of the things we need to consider when we are improving our parking lots is, do we want to install that as we do it, or do we want to do it at a later time? So those are some decisions that are going to be coming up over the next couple of years.
That may be a good incentive. The app might be better just for the lots, because it gives people an incentive to go to them and look and go, okay, I know I can park here.
Yes, exactly.
And that could be a good incentive.
Right. Team parking, did I miss anything? I guess, do I only have one team person here? Yeah. Oh, no, I got 2.
You have two
Okay.
people shaking their heads.
They're not saying add anything. So this was just meant to be an update so that you know how we're proceeding. And as we need policy direction, we're going to be coming back to you. And probably when we're doing strategic plan updates, we will have done more along the line. Like we'll be coming in potentially with our timeline and our pro forma, so you can just see where we are with that. The procurement document, I think the scope was in your packet, and we didn't necessarily mean for you to read through every single word of that. And I think we're actually going to refine it a little bit more. That was developed before we met with the Barnstable staff person, and she, again, was extremely helpful. And we would like to learn from their already established program, so we're not reinventing the wheel here. There's, we have some quirks, they have some quirks that aren't quite the same, but for the most part, there's quite a bit of similarity.
When you were talking, you had other for like the stakeholders.
Yeah.
I think the neighborhoods, I think, are a whole separate category. I think the downtown people living in the neighborhoods.
Yeah, put the Civic League on there so that we could capture the neighborhood associations. But you're right, that like the residential parking
Residential
permit
parking,
districts.
those, I think those districts are their own animal that have to be figured out.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have a staff person in charge of this, will there be a board that works with that person? I think this is something that us as a board, or you or the police, we will not have enough time to do the adjustments and do the things that need to do to make this work over 2 or 3 years. So I just wonder, is that something that's being considered still?
The program manager position is being considered for sure. Barnstable does not have a parking commission. So we talked about that for a bit with the staff person. They do have a different governmental setup. The town manager over there, by their charter, makes a lot of the decisions. That person makes the decisions as to the pricing, for example. We don't have that structure here. So what we want to do, though, is, to the extent possible, minimize the board's role in any of the administrative issues with this, which is a great deal of it at this point. What you will be presented with at some point is the pricing structure. We would plan to give you options and a recommendation after we have, gotten some stakeholder feedback and input. But the idea would be a program manager would really keep us on track.
Right. And I think, and I'll just make a plug, I think the program manager and, 4 or 5 strong individuals, so they want to complain to somebody, they're not calling your office. Mm-hmm. They're going into that meeting once a week or that every month, because I think this is, as we've seen prior, politically this could fall apart again. So I just think that, I look at it as a way to sort of shield, you still have input, but have other people and have some place for people to go and vent and learn about it. So I just look at it from a slightly different perspective.
Definitely appreciated. In Barnstable, they have a couple of hearing officers, and they have a very spelled out appeals process. And a number of people can either just dismiss the ticket immediately, depending on what happens, or not. And the people just have to pay it. So there's bound to be some complaining, at least at the beginning. So we're all just going to have to be prepared for that. But I think our thinking, at least right now, is that another commission set up to handle something like this means more bureaucracy, basically. We're hoping to do with that.
And I don't disagree, but I think it's going to be more than just people complaining about tickets. It's going to be, all the cars are parking in our neighborhood. It's not in the district now. Can we add it? Our neighborhood is overwhelmed. There's cars parked here all day long. What do we do? I mean, those are going to be fine details as it has to adjust.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And they are doing that now.
Yeah. I know.
I just had a couple of things. I think it was smart to talk to Barnstable and see what their challenges are and what their successes are, and adapt it to here. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times we here in Nantucket don't want to do that because it's different here. But I think we can learn from other towns. So I thought that was good that you guys dug in with somebody over there. I think like Christine and I talked a lot about is trying to get more efficiency and improvements out of NERDA when we start implementing these things. I don't want to speak for you, but you've got a lot of feedback just through your daily work of people. I think if we could tweak it a little bit, as we give people incentives to not park downtown, they're willing to ride the bus if it could be improved here and there. So I think we should try to work on that as much as we can. Two Fairgrounds lot, I think there's a great potential for improvements there for a shuttle bus. I think if we implement these things, we have to give people other options for not just improvements in NERDA, but also shuttles. We have to be a little creative, whether it's, I know the taxis will kill me, but vouchers for Uber for elderly or programs that are working in other places that makes sense.
For taxis.
What's that?
Or vouchers for taxis.
Either
trying
way.
to get you, keep it alive.
But they don't want to do that. So I'm just, trying to think outside the box. And the sensors is a great idea. There's historic towns that have been doing this for over almost 10 years. I know the cobblestones are a problem, but if we at least had them in the parking lots and you could look on your phone and say, there's 6 spots at 37 or 2 Fairgrounds Road, then you could just go there. That's pretty common. And the kiosks can be hidden. We could put one in visitor services. We could make a deal with Stop and Shop. We could, right? They don't have to be on every corner. So I think that's going to be a huge fear right off the bat, thinking of paid parking. So I think we can make it work. But like what you said, there's going to be, politically, we're going to get pushed.
There's
And
gonna be
it's
a
going to be a
lot of
little
stuff to
scary,
figure out.
and we're going to have to do it right. That's all. Try to list them off.
Yeah. And I just kind of want to touch on the NERDA. We've talked a lot about having it be set up for commuters. So having a more dense schedule between 7 and 9 a.m. that gets you to town to get to work, not getting to work kind of at 9:20, 9:25 and going the whole loop of the island. But I also think talking about having this year-round service with NERDA, making sure we still keep that bus going between 2 fairgrounds, because we should be encouraging people to not just use this during the summer, but all year round, because that's where you get, I think the frustration is you get set in this path in the winter where you can drive downtown, then also need to change in the summer. But if you just commute every day via bus, that's kind of the changing culture. But if we all of a sudden just stop once the paid parking is not there, I think people will have trouble adjusting each time. I think that's another way to just change the culture.
Improve habits. Yeah.
But the principles apply in the winter as they do in the summer. If there's not 85% open in the winter, then you don't turn it off. And people they can still go and park in the 2 hour. I mean, what happens to businesses downtown? People park when there's no enforcement or no, they're allowed to park as long as they want. People park in front of their businesses all day. The businesses suffer completely, and there's no turnover. And so I just think that, and people have to realize they can walk 1 block, 2 blocks, park in the 2 hour and walk in, and then the downtown will be more vibrant year round. So I just think those kind of changes, this system is I envision it working more than just 3 months a year, and then we turn it off. I envision that this is a permanent part of our, where it's needed.
No, and I agree. That's, I think, what I would like to see.
The rates can be adjusted.
Yeah, exactly. The rates can be adjusted, and it's all adjusted so that you end up at 85% occupancy in these different areas. The most convenient places should be the most expensive. The less convenient should be less expensive, which are sort of basic principles. And I know you guys know that. I'm sort of saying it for the camera, so that's important. And there's a lot of aspects to this. I also think we can't. I think if we're adding 500 or 700 cars at peak, which is what our numbers kind of tell us, if we're doing that, it's going to be hard to build enough satellite lots and and fairgrounds might be needed for something else. We want to build a system. In my mind, the goal in 5 or 10 years should be such a good system of buses and other transportation that you don't have to drive to a lot somewhere. Maybe there's a lot at the end of Tom Nevers Road, so you can get on something there quickly, a shuttle that you're talking about. But once people put their keys in turn the ignition, they're going to take a chance. So I just think we're such a small island, and we've got such a good opportunity to actually create something that benefits everybody. I think we really, this is a good step. But I don't want to lose sight of that. I don't want to go part way and lose sight of that.
And I always think going back to the data platform to see where people's home and work is, because so much of the island lives on Old South and kind of Milestone. And then we have to drive all the way to the Chicken Box to get on the shuttle bus. What if we could just be parked out on that Milestone area, Operdale Farm Road? That could help.
Yeah, I mean, we have to build a level of confidence with people who are traveling here for the 2 busy months of the year that they don't have to bring a car. They've got to have reliable ability to get a ride somewhere, whether it's by bus or ride share or electric bike.
That one, I think the beach. I mean, so many cars, they just load up with so many beach. I see a lot of people they're going to the beach. They might take the Nerda into town or get a taxi into town, but I think the cars and the beach are going to be one that will be difficult to crack. But.
Okay, I guess so now it's select board comment reports and comments. We have George Pucci here from Town Council to just give us an update on where we're at with the Sconset Beach and the Conservation Commission appeal.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. George Pucci from Town Council's office. Just to bring you up to date, I'm sure you know, overall, the commission did deny the Sconset Bluff expansion project. Very close vote. Careful deliberations. 4-3 vote. They denied it. SBPF has filed a appeal with Mass DEP seeking a superseding order of conditions, basically to overrule their denial under the State Wetlands Protection Act. The commission also denied the expansion project under the local wetlands bylaw. That appeal will go to Superior Court. The appeal to DEP is due within 10 business days of the order. An appeal under the bylaw to Superior Court is a 60-day deadline. So I have not seen anything served, and I know Jeff Carlson's been monitoring it. We haven't seen anything served as yet in Superior Court appealing the local bylaw decision, but the appeal has been made to Mass DEP on the state portion. This week, apparently, DEP had planned originally to do their site visit on the request for the superseding order of conditions. Jeff advised me that they had moved that they're looking at a date toward the end of August now to do a site visit. And that would essentially be somebody from Mass DEP will come out, view the site, speak to people on site, and then they take that information back, and at one point they will issue a decision one way or another on whether to overrule the commission in whole or in part or to uphold that order. There's a 70-day deadline for Mass DEP to act under their state regulations. Typically that can get extended out, so I wouldn't I wouldn't look at the 70th day and expect a order necessarily by then, but I would expect it, especially even thinking back the last time DEP ruled on the earlier project, within a month or two of the site visit, I would expect some type of ruling from Mass DEP. I can give you an overall view of the reasons for denial and SBPF's grounds for appealing to Mass DEP if you need that, or answer any other questions you have. We're at a very preliminary stage at this point. DEP, the Conservation Commission is automatically a party to the appeal of the order, but we haven't really filed an appearance of counsel or anything like that. It's really the board's decision if you want to engage counsel actively on the request for the superseding order of conditions, in which case I would probably want to attend the site visit and probably submit some commentary to Mass DEP while they're deliberating on the superseding order. There are no regulations that specifically provide for that, but if we're engaged on this, typically I would submit some commentary in support of the board's order if the board were to choose that you want to actively defend the denial of the permit. The Superior Court case, when that's filed, you really do need to get counsel in there, or you can get defaulted in that.
George, what's the time frame for needing to decide whether or how to actively defend the decision?
Pretty much now. I would do it sooner rather than later. Fortunately, the DEP site visit was postponed from this week I certainly would recommend a decision one way or another, before the site visit is rescheduled for the end of August. Just because once that occurs and then it's under deliberations, it sort of takes on a life of its own. So it would be advisable to, provide some commentary early on, before it's too late for any type of consideration.
If we didn't engage in that, what would be the next step? What if they did obtain a new order of conditions?
If they obtain a superseding order of conditions, that is also appealable. So one decision you may want to consider at that point is, say hypothetically, Mass DEP, let's go on the other side. Let's say that Mass DEP upholds the order, affirms the order in its entirety. You could expect an appeal from the party that filed for the superseding order. That appeal would be due within 10 days of that superseding order. And that appeal goes to, and the converse of that, if they issue a superseding order overruling the commission, you could decide whether or not you want to file an appeal of that. And what that would be a administrative, a quasi-judicial administrative appeal to Mass DEP, to the Office of Appeals and Dispute Resolution at Mass DEP. Those are evidentiary proceedings. You retain expert witnesses, you submit testimony. There would be an administrative hearing where you cross-examine the other party's witnesses, and at some point a decision would come down on that. That decision is then also appealable to Superior Court under a State Administrative Procedures Act appeal.
And what's the basis of upholding or not upholding it at that level? For the administrative appeal, you're saying it's...
They would do their own evidentiary hearing, basically of new. So if you wanted to, if you think that DEP got it wrong one way or another, and they should have, listened to certain consultants' input during the public hearing process before CONSCOM that they did not, you would seek to then use those witnesses in that administrative appeal. So DEP, and again, it's not DEP the DEP that issues the superseding order. It's the administrative law judge in the Office of Appeals and Dispute Resolution at Mass DEP. They would render a decision based on the evidence before them, almost like another super permitting board at that point.
So no new evidence is allowed. It's prior evidence.
No, it would be new evidence, but typically in these cases, there's been such a vetting of the project that you would typically see the same consultants that you saw along the way.
Right.
And the town didn't. There was some peer review done with respect to the submissions that CONCOM arranged for. There was also some extensive testimony presented by the Land Council and the Ms. Atherton's group. I apologize. The
Coastal Conservancy.
Yeah, Coastal Conservancy. So there was quite a bit of input on the project during the course of the proceedings. Basically, what it comes down to is it's a matter of performance standards. Conservation Commission ended up voting that they found that the applicant did not meet the applicable performance standards. That number one, it wasn't a project limited to protection of pre-78 buildings, pre-1978 buildings, that it also included infrastructure. And if it was to protect pre-78 buildings, that it didn't meet applicable performance standards, that the applicant didn't show that there weren't better alternatives of protecting that. They also had raised issues about gap lots, along the project area. SBPF has contended that in these areas of the gap lots, they need to extend the structure in front of those gap lots for a continuous structure, for the expanded project. That was their claim on that. So that's where we're at. I should point out this case is a little bit unusual in that you'll recall that this board voted to authorize, as a landowner involved in the application, voted to authorize SBPF to file this notice of intent with the Conservation Commission. This appeal of the Conservation Commission's order now, though, is being filed strictly by the applicant, not the actual property owner. So that's, I'm not recommending that you do anything with that information, but it's definitely relevant information that you want to, consider. Typically, you'll have an applicant working with a homeowner or, a property owner, usually kind of, act together. And even if the applicant is doing all the lion's share of the work and the property owner is just sitting back and waiting to see what happens, either for the purpose of sale of the property or for whatever reason, typically they're in sync, the applicant and the owner of the property. Here you have the applicant now, originally with your consent, has filed seeking the superseding order against the Conservation Commission, which you're the executive body, with the jurisdiction over retaining counsel and incurring costs of defense for your permitting board, but you're also the property owner. So, there was discussion at the time when you assented to this notice of intent as the property owner, not to condition it on not appealing. But there was no, at least from my standpoint, I don't think there's anything legally binding you from saying, well, we don't agree now to allow the appeal to go forward. That would be something, you may want to consider. Do you consent, in effect, to the applicant suing your permitting board, when you're the property owner? That's something for you to think about.
How do you think that how is DEP or Superior Court going to look on that aspect of it? What impact might that have?
Well, it's not going to have any impact until you raise the issue, because contrary to the notice of intent required the property owner's sign off. The appeal to DEP, the applicant has standing to file that appeal. So if you don't do anything about it, Mass DEP is going to probably not raise the issue themselves. They're going to rule one way or another on that superseding order. Same thing with the Superior Court appeal. The court's not going to reach out and say, oh, gee, I don't see the property owner involved in this case. But if you were to decide that you wanted to raise the issue, then, we would seek to raise that issue. Like, say, hypothetically, the board says, you know what, I object to them going forward with this, at least without even approaching us before they did that. I object to it. Counsel, I want you to object in these DEP proceedings. Then I would go ahead and do that. I would write to DEP. There isn't really any type of hard and fast rule about that because, like I say, the applicant has standing to file that appeal.
How does the town meeting vote work into that?
It's another interesting thing. It's almost you could look at like a cart before the horse type thing. I don't know which one would be the cart and which the horse, but if you look at it this way, going forward with further appeals on the environmental issues is sort of, the cart before the horse of, well, would we even be able to get permission to do this? So, however you want to look at that is up to you, but that's the fact is, say SBPF, you don't raise any issue, or you raise the issue and Mass DEP says, forget it. We're going to rule on this. And they go forward and they win wholesale. You could still turn around and say, guess what? Your permit's worthless because we're not granting consent to it. And, or it goes to town meeting and it gets defeated at town meeting. So, it is what it is. But there are deadlines that apply. So it's not like they could sort of sit back and say, well, we're not going to file the DEP appeal until we see what town meeting would do. But, that issue is out there, is how, would you consent to it, in that context? I have to say, and this is not policy advice or a policy insight, but as counsel, as litigation counsel, and I've represented this Conservation Commission over the last 9 to 10 years, and in that we've never lost a case with the Nantucket Conservation Commission, any way, shape, or form. Permit denials, permit grants, regulatory taking claims, you name it. It's a very strong commission, and we always prevail in the Superior Court or appeals court. So, from sort of a litigator's perspective, if I'm giving you legal advice about it, I find it a little untoward that there was no reach out. The Conservation Commission had raised issues about, well, one of the members, who happened to be the chair, was, voted in opposition, but he was very clear during the hearing process that if there were certain issues that were addressed in terms of, the size and scope of the project, he was definitely indicating a grounds for getting some type of approval on this. And there was never any type of reach out or, approaching you to say, well, what do you think about this? Or we could look at it maybe this way, or do this part of the project this year, or look at this area. It was just, okay, we did the initial project, and now we want to do the expanded project, and that's what we're going to seek permitting for. And then it gets denied, and we don't hear anything, and we just get notice of applying for the superseding order. So, and like I say, this isn't a policy insight. It's more from a litigator's perspective. You're the property owner, and you consented to it in the first place. You control counsel. You control how vigorously you want the Conservation Commission defended. It would make sense for, a party in litigation to have reached out to you at some point. So we're having the conversation for the first time now. There's always time for dialogue, no matter what stage you are at in proceedings. And I'm just sort of throwing that out there to you. You don't want to go down this, sort of Kafkaesque path that oh, how did we end up here? So.
Don? Mm-hmm. George, I have a question, comment, try to think through this. You keep saying, so the DEP superseding order, you're explaining how it looks a little funny from the outside, that we signed the NOI from the go forward, and now we're objecting to the applicant going forward. Is it that, or is it we're supporting the Concom? Is it one and the same? Is it only seen one way from? Because I thought we were saying, yes, go ahead and apply. Whatever Concom comes up with is what we come up with. We're not support. I know we're the property owner, but that's the way the three of us who voted yes to go forward is to allow you to apply. And so now I'm hearing you say, well, now we're objecting. We would be objecting them going forward. I guess
no, I'm saying that's not. You're not. You haven't done anything.
We haven't done anything.
I know, but we're talking hypotheticals.
Yeah. You haven't done anything. It's just I'm just putting out the context of this and the legalities involved and who the parties are and who has standing. To just I want you to have all the information in front of you. You could very well sit as a policy decider and say, no, I'm good with this. I want to see how this will play out. It was a 4-3 vote, and there were a lot of good issues involved, and overall we were in support of the project, and we backed before the initial project, and then it ended up at the expansion. And I want to see how this plays out in the permitting process. I want to see how Mass DEP rules, or you could take that position and say, I have no problem with it going forward like that. Or you could say, wait a minute, you didn't even come back to me and ask if, we're supportive of you seeking a further appeal of this order. Are you okay with the fact that you have to incur the fees to defend the Conservation Commission with the order? And if you do, I can tell you, again, and I refer to representing them for the last 9 or 10 years, if you engage counsel to represent them, we're going to represent them. I mean, we are going to be very aggressive in representing the Conservation Commission and getting that denial upheld. And if you support it further, if in the event Mass DEP overruled them, we would vigorously seek to have that overturned at the administrative appeal level.
Right.
So, these are just issues that you just need to be aware of.
I don't know, Jason, if this is kind of what you were getting at, because I thought it was very clear during the NOI discussion and assent, and I know specifically, Dawn, that you said it, that we at least said it, and I don't know if we included it in writing, that just because this board approved the assent doesn't mean it is indicative of a decision on a license. The license doesn't have to be granted. So
Yes.
I don't know if that was captured in writings, but I feel that would hopefully show DEP a little bit of the context of the decision, that it wasn't just we're a property owner and we're okay with it. There was definitely a let's see what the process.
Yeah, but it's somewhat, it will be totally irrelevant to them.
Okay.
I mean, if short of an objection that you're saying, counsel, go in and object to this.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to take into account, the conditions for the original assent to the notice of intent, and it's not the type of condition that says we're allowing the notice of intent only up to that decision point. You don't have that. You didn't vote that. So a couple of the things that were voted as contingencies were the shovel-ready project, and then Libby had to work very hard with them to get that completed. That was the shovel-ready project for the relocation of the north end of Baxter Road. Issues like that. You definitely, I don't have the document in front of me, but you definitely made that declaration to them that the fact that we're assenting to this and letting you go to seek permitting from the Conservation Commission does not mean that we're going to give you a license for this. So that was very clear. Okay. But you saying that is different than, objecting to them going forward now to DEP. But it's the same, and it's the same thing also for the town meeting question that Matt asked is, well, no matter what happens, it doesn't guarantee that. So,
To be honest, once that happened, I kind of took my head out of this and said, I don't have to, I'm just being honest. I don't have to think about this right now. We've put a lot of time into this for a long time, and I kind of took a break myself from this because of the town meeting vote. But it's going to come back to us in some manner.
Yeah.
No matter what we do, it's gonna come back to us. And so the question, and I think, I wouldn't be ready to make any decision tonight. I would want to see sort of a decision tree, different decision trees. If we do this, we do this, we do this. I usually want to support the board because I don't like to be on two different sides. I don't want us against the Concom and suing each other, with different lawyers. That doesn't kind of make sense. So that's difficult. But we also know what happened last time. They went up and we had already agreed, and they had Concom denied, and they got, the full project for a rock revetment, which is how we bargained to get back to what we have. So it would be interesting to, part of me would like to see what the result is, because we would see where the state's going to fall on this. In some ways, it might be interesting to see what the result of this would be, because then we would know where the state stands on this issue.
So if you're taking that tack, there's not a lot involved in getting the type of serious, costly litigation that I'm talking about would be more at the level of once a superseding order issued, that appeal to the administrative law judge at Mass DEP, that's a costly proceeding because then you're getting expert witnesses and all that preparation time. And those cases are handled very seriously. It's funny. Some people don't realize like the administrative appeal level with these administrative law judges is often much more vigorous than a court proceeding. They're really hard and fast with their deadlines and your filing requirements and identifying your experts and getting that testimony in, and they're very they're intense proceedings. So your real cost would kick in at that point. It's fairly minimal to just have counsel present at the site visit and any type of commentary that you wanted to give. But even that, if you wanted to wait and see how Mass DEP rules, you sort of would not then be really submitting much in detail to Mass DEP to sort of say why they did what they did.
Matt, I don't quite understand what would be the advantage of not taking a stance.
Well, I'm not saying I don't know whether not to take a stance or to take a stance, but we need more information. I would need more information and sort of walk through the possibilities, which is hard to do on the camera and hard to do. You can't tip your hand if you're going to be in litigation. I mean, some of this is difficult, and so but knowing it sort of my feeling was that the sort of the state sided for the hard armoring, and they sided with the whole thing. If they side, let's just pretend they say that again. Then we're back to, it's still going to come back to us anyway. But it's going to come back to us with us understanding where they stand on it, what the state does.
But we are going to understand that regardless, whether we take a stance or not.
But also, here's the other point.
Can I just stop this for a second? This was meant to be an update on what kind of decisions we might need to be making, not to actually get into a debate in something that involves litigation, which we should be doing in executive session.
Yeah,
we are not taking any kind of votes tonight.
Yeah, this is an overall view of where you stand, what the hypothetical potentials are. You're in litigation at this point, so you're certainly entitled to put this on for executive session. That's where you would want to have that discussion.
We'd really have to talk strategy in executive session.
Exactly. That's my point.
And I was looking more for just a cursory, what you were thinking. I don't need details.
It seemed like it was just getting a little bit too intense.
I do think that we should have the opportunity to discuss that further specifically and whether that is public or executive, but I think that if it's appropriate for public, then I think the next meeting we have, if it needs to be an executive, that's another issue. But
I'm coming back on the 21st, I think, for HDC again. You get more of those coming up. Matt's getting his debating skills already for that. I'm going to be ready for you this time.
I'll send it to Ray.
I'm going to be ready for you this time, but I'm coming back. I have to come for that. I don't know if that gave you opportunity to fit in something then or not, but.
Okay.
Well, I suppose my question is the discussion whether to support the CONCOM. Is that something that should be discussed in executive or in open session?
Yeah, I think, yeah.
That's executive.
It does, because it has to do with litigation strategy and you're the board who controls town council, both assignment of town council, what you want town council doing, all of that.
And we need to know potential costs. What does this cost? What's the outcome that we want to get? Or do we agree? So there's a lot of things you have to sort of know. It's the other thing. The other reason I ask it, the other this I can say on the camera. The other reason I ask the question is, let's for argument's sake say that whatever happens. Not that far from now, we aren't going to own that land. And when we don't own the land, they don't have to come to us. They don't have to ask us for a license. They just go to the state and do what the state lets them do. So to answer your question, why would we want to know? Well, it might be nice to know what the state's going to do when we don't own the land.
You mean when the land erodes away?
When the land erodes away,
and
it erodes away, and they do a survey and they own it. And even if it accretes and goes back out, we still don't own it. Unless we do a whole nother issue, but that's a longer story.
And just to clarify, my point was that we're going to know where the state stands regardless, whether we sit back and don't do anything supporting the Concom or whether we do. So I that was more my point, is that either way we know where the state stands after that.
And don't forget too, you have a local bylaw, and that's subject to a totally different appellate route. So that will be done. And in fact, the bylaw, typically, if there's a bylaw appeal, which they'll have to file if they want to go forward with seeking the superseding order, it doesn't do them any good if they don't also have the bylaw overturned, bylaw decision. That bylaw appeal, if that's filed in Superior Court, and then you're at the stage of a appeal of a superseding order of conditions issued by Mass DEP, Mass DEP will typically stay those proceedings pending the resolution of the Superior Court appeal of the bylaw decision. So you want to keep that in mind as well. And that doesn't have to do with strategy. That's just factual, procedural stuff for you to know about. So don't forget, you got a local bylaw here that's very important to the town, and that would also be subject to review. So it's not only Mass DEP that you're waiting to hear on, because they don't give a decision on the local bylaw.
Madam Chair, do we need to decide on if we want George to be there for the DEP visit, or is that town admin decision, or is that executive session? Or
I don't know.
you would be there just to listen?
Yeah, last time, they it's good to be at site visits. They don't provide testimony or advocacy, but I would recommend, having counsel present at a site visit to see what goes on and what's discussed and what's observed specifically.
It makes sense to me.
I think just generally as property owners, it would, if it was.
I mean, in
private
a case of
property,
this nature, every time Concom, does something, for an isolated wetland or something, I don't go to site visits on those, but this is a, pretty important, project for the town. I would recommend having counsel present.
Well, if you need direction for me, I think it makes sense.
Libby?
I'm fine authorizing George to attend that.
Okay. Is that the consensus? We support that? Okay. All right. So I guess that's the one bit of direction.
Anything else from me?
And we'll figure
I'll
out
be on
if we
standby
should
if you
schedule
need.
an executive session after that. Okay.
Yep.
Committee reports? Did you want to say something, Deanne? Yes. Briefly. I'll turn into pumpkins at 9
Deanne
o'clock.
Atherton, just two pieces of information. One, you might be interested in seeing a very similar situation in the town of Bourne, and we can send you maybe the most recent newspaper article, but it's very similar to here, where the town owns the bluff and the land below the bluff, and the Concom denied hard armoring, and the state issued a superseding order. And then town council advised the select board that they did not have to abide by the determination of the state, because as the property owner, they had the final word. So we can send that to you. I think it would be helpful. Also, we are looking for the minutes of July 25th, when you adopted the motion to agree to assent to the NOI, and they are no longer available. I know you're looking for them, but it would be helpful for us to know exactly what that motion was and what the intent was. So if we can speed that along, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, we're moving on to committee reports. Anybody got anything?
Nothing for me.
Go for it.
So the Neighborhood First had our first meeting. That's the group that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund put together to implement the $20 million. And Tucker Holland did a really great job kind of walking us through what the Affordable Housing Trust Fund has done over their strategic plan and kind of what the 3-year plan is and where these funds might come into play. So I think we all walked into the room excited to spend money right away. And it's going to be, we're actually using a strategic plan, and it'll probably be a couple of years down the line before we spend it, but it was really helpful to get everybody together. The plastics ban workshop, the informal group, we have another info session on August 13th at 8 a.m. here. So business owners and people in the community are encouraged to attend. The Town Government Study Committee has been having open sessions to hear from summer residents, year-round residents, trying to get feedback. And that is next Wednesday, 4:30 in this room, August 14th. And we have another waste summit coming up on August 15th. And the last thing was I just had a really great meeting with the Committee of Non-Voting Taxpayers last Saturday. And it was just really nice to hear kind of their input and how they view Nantucket and not being able to actually vote at town meeting and really wanting to see the infrastructure improvements on Nantucket. And so I just kind of wanted to relay that conversation back to the board. Pretty short today.
I've got a couple of quick things. I'll follow up plastic. I spoke to Stop and Shop and asked, because they have film and clean bags they send off. And I asked what happens with those. And those are actually recycled. So they're sent to Trex or somewhere. There's a place they go to get those recycled. They also have their other plastic that they send is not landfilled. It's goes waste to energy generation. So it's brought, but they have to pay to ship it and pay to process it, but it's taken away and used that way. So I think at some point we should be trying to take stuff from our digester as a trial and send it out and see what happens, see what it would cost, see what would happen with it. It may be cheaper to do that, even though it seems like it's expensive, than it is to bury it in the ground, but who knows? I met the utilities work group, which was DPW and water, et cetera. I met with those guys, just sat in on their meeting, and they really are making an effort to sort of time all their projects together and to work together. The issue of how to work with, Verizon and electric company, et cetera, still needs work to figure out what leverage we have as a community or how we best to do that. They have some ideas, but there's still more work to be done on that. There was, if you looked, Mass Municipal had an interesting article. In Newton, they are using VIA, which is an on-demand service, and they used to subsidize the cabs for their elderly. They now do it through through Uber or Lyft, one of those, and or actually doing it through VIA, and they are doing it to move their elderly, and the elderly know when they're coming, et cetera. It's the model I think we should be at least exploring for the winter. I'm not convinced that that a fixed route, especially if the route doesn't go where people are, is the right answer, but something like this might be. They're using it now for their elderly. They brought 16,000 people in the first 2 months or so, but it seems pretty interesting. And the other thing is, I sent this to Libby and Don earlier today. There's been a beach closure out in Nantucket that we need some more research to see what happened. But we're talking about there's concerns about going down that path. I contend we own up to the high water mark for all sorts of uses. Allowing beaches to close right down to the water is not how we've done things. It's not our customary practice. It's not what Nantucket has done. So we need to make sure that, we are researching this, figuring out really what's happening. And some of it, I think, is there's just so many people and people aren't respectful. We had the threat of a closure at 40th Pole, 15, 20 years ago. That was a result of people just, leaving trash in this guy's yard, doing a bunch of things they shouldn't have been doing. Fortunately, that is a yearly license, and the beach is still open right up to the high tide mark. And that should be what's happening everywhere on this island until we sort out what our actual rights. That is our customary practice. That's what's been happening. We shouldn't be allowing it to disintegrate. It shouldn't be going away. It's just too important. So, I'm looking forward to that coming back to the board and being, sort of sorted out. But that's it.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.